I've had a ton of questions over the years on my torn hip labrums because it's been one of my most public injuries and one that a lot of people relate to because it's pretty common. How it happened is I tore both of my hip labrums squatting raw. Each of them happened about a year apart. I tore my right hip labrum first, squatting at the 2012 IPF Raw World Championships, which I did go on to win. And once I finally got the MRI and figured out what it was, I started to figure out how to take care of it. I didn't get the surgery because I had a few medical opinions, and the general advice was that they were going to have to cut through the muscle of my glute to get into my hip capsule because I was so large and have so much meat there. And if they did that, I certainly wouldn't be able to come back to lifting and squatting the numbers that I could. So I figured out how to work around it, continued squatting heavy raw, eventually tore my left hip labrum a year later. In terms of working around it, one of the benefits was that both of my hip labrum tears were very specific and very related to raw squatting in competition, which is how it happened. So the ways I was able to work around it were making small tweaks to the squat movement on how I tore it. So some things that helped and gave a little bit of pain relief and allowed me to work around it were things like having a narrower stance than I did in competition, toes a little more forward than I did in competition, a high bar squat instead of a low bar squat, a safety bar squat, a belt squat, changing it up just enough, a few degrees of difference of separation from how I tore my hip labrums allowed me to kind of work through some squats and be pain-free, or not even necessarily pain-free, but less pain. Also things like doing pin squats at various heights, because it was the deep raw squat position that really hurt my hips. So I could do raw squats or pause squats a few inches above parallel, and it kept me out of that painful zone and allowed me to keep pushing my squat and at least have heavy weight on my back and do something that resembled the squat that I was desperately trying so hard to get back to. Another thing that actually helped was dry needling. I had a very good physical therapist, and they had to get very deep with the needles with dry needling. I don't really have a good answer on why that helped because I can't figure out why dry needling would help a torn hip labrum and the pain associated with it, other than somewhat loosening up those muscles around there and not being so protective and holding it so tight. But it was only a temporary relief. So I could go get dry needled one afternoon, and that evening and the next day squat with less pain. And really what my torn hip labrums forced me to do was to transition solely into squatting in single ply equipment. And it was at that point when I had torn my second hip labrum, tried doing another meet, and the training for that, it made me decide, it forced me to compete just single ply, because I could do my squats even with straps down on a squat suit and have almost no pain. So if I was trying to squat heavy raw, it was probably, my pain level was at a 6 to an 8 out of 10, depending on the day. I could put the squat suit on, even straps down, and they would act like briefs. And instead of a 6 or 8 out of 10, it would come down to a 2 to 4 out of 10. Other things that helped were neoprene pants. So they have neoprene type shorts. It doesn't provide the same amount of support and compression as a squat suit or briefs do, but instead of a 6 or 8, it maybe brought it down to 4 to a 5. And to this day, my hip labrums still bother me. If I try and push my raw squats heavy more than a couple weeks in a row, they really get flared up again, and it takes quite a few months for that pain to even subside. So sometimes it's not the answer a lot of people want to hear, but I found a way to continue competing even though I didn't get surgery on either hip labrum, and that way to keep competing was using briefs. So even if you want to continue squatting raw, you still may be able to, but you may have to utilize other tools in training like the neoprene pants, or even finding yourself a pair of briefs or a single ply squat suit that you can wear straps down that will help protect your hips in training and kind of extend that longevity.